Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on data privacy and data governance. We are very happy to have you with us today. So for this session, it will take around 1 hour. Most of it will be conducted in English. However, from time to time, we will do some quick recaps for the key takeaways in Thai language. Before we start the event, let me explain you our house rules for the webinar. So please note that all participants will be muted during the webinar. If you do have questions for us, please submit them in the Q&A box that you can find on the right-hand side of your screen. And then to the extent that the time permits, we will respond to your questions during the Q&A session. Before the Q&A session, the QR code for our feedback survey will also be displayed on your screen. And it will take approximately just less than a minute to complete that survey while we are on the Q&A session. So please use that opportunity to share your feedback with us. With the house rules explained, let me give you a brief overview of the topics that we plan to cover in the event today. So if you are coming from a compliance background, you're probably familiar with the PDPA requirements, but you might wonder how this fits into the context of data governance. Similarly, if you are coming more from a data governance or a data management background, you probably understand data management, but wonder how this supports data privacy. In today's webinar, we want to explore this relationship between data privacy and data governance. Why is this actually an interesting topic? Well, since we have been preparing for the PDPA for quite a while here in Thailand, many organizations have made good progress with respect to data privacy. The most recent postponement of the PDPA by another year to May 2022 now also gives organizations who are not yet ready a chance to actually catch up. And with data becoming increasingly important, there's also clear recognition of the need to not only govern personal data, but also other business critical data. So if you are looking after your organization's data governance program, how can you leverage on what has been done for PDPA? And what other aspects do we need to address to move towards enterprise-wide data governance? Similarly, if you are working on the PDPA program, and your organization has an established data governance practice, how does that data governance help you run the PDPA efforts more effectively and more efficiently? In the session today, we will provide you with answers to these questions and also share some practical examples of how organizations in Europe have tackled the data privacy and data governance challenges. And lastly, we will also provide you with a tool that you could use as a compass to either get started or to recalibrate your data journey. Okay, so now before we get to that, let's do a quick round of introductions. With us here today is Ondřej Kulhánek. He's from KPMG in the Czech Republic. He's a specialist in the data management space. So Ondřej, could you please introduce yourselves briefly to our audience?
Of course. Good afternoon to everybody. It's great to be meeting you today. Well, I wish I could join personally in Thailand, but today it's online. I'm based in the KPMG Czech Republic, part of the Lighthouse here. At the same time, I am one of the leaders of the KPMG Global Advanced Data Management team and one of the co-authors of the ADM framework that we are proposing to our clients. I'm also a member of the Global Data Management and Digital Governance Capability Network, also part of the European Center of Excellence for Business Intelligence and Analytics. I've been working on a lot of projects across the globe, and of course, a lot of them related to data governance and data privacy, especially here in Europe for GDPR, and that's where I'm going to share some experience today. So thanks a lot, looking forward.
Okay, thank you, Ondřej. So for myself, my name is Florian Magin. I'm a partner in our financial services advisory practice here in Bangkok. So originally from Germany, but I've spent more than 10 years now here in Thailand. I'm specialized in technology and cyber risk management, and because data plays a very crucial role in those domains, I also look after the data governance related topics. Okay, so let's actually get started with the content that we have prepared for you. So yes, as you are probably all aware, businesses are becoming more and more digitized, and therefore more data than ever is being produced and captured. So that's not limited to structured data, but it also applies to unstructured data, and data not just within the organization, but also external data outside of the organization. At the same time, more and more organizations recognize data as a critical asset, and therefore it's an important goal to maximize the value of this asset. Many reasons for that. Well, for example, better customer data allows us to better understand customers and therefore grow the business faster and more effectively. On the other hand, for example, better risk data allows us to better understand our risk exposures and then optimize risk management to have a more effective resource allocation. There are also a number of challenges that have to be tackled when it comes to data, because more data does not necessarily mean better data. If the data has poor quality, we will not actually be able to get the benefits of data, but possibly we could make wrong management decisions that can adversely impact the business. Also, at an operational level, we might have to cope with inefficiencies that are introduced by things like duplicate records, incomplete or inaccurate data sets. And all of that will take time and effort to resolve. Besides these internal motivations, there are also external drivers to improve the way data is governed and managed. Laws and regulations actually force organizations to uplift their data governance and management capabilities. The PDPA and Cybersecurity Act force organizations to improve data protection and data security. And within the financial sector, there are also additional relevant regulations and initiatives that have important implications when it comes to data governance. And it's not always actually the expected business benefits resulting from improved data management practices that motivate the organizations to actually launch data governance initiatives. So there's actually some interesting data, which is from a survey from European banks, which indicated that actually the majority of the banks have implemented data governance to meet regulatory requirements, not so much in order to actually add value to their business. But however, no matter what the motivation or the driver is, what is clear is that there is a need to improve data governance and data management capabilities in order to increase the business benefits from data. Okay, so now let's look at data more closely, because we can really consider data as a double-edged sword, because it introduces both at the same time opportunities, but also risks. So on the opportunity side, we can use data to provide better services, better products, deliver better customer experience. But then on the other side, on the risk side, we need to be aware of the negative consequences of using data inappropriately or of not properly safeguarding our data. And this is not limited to the internal pains that result from poor data quality, such as the inefficient operations or wrong decision-making based on inaccurate data. It has actually now also an important external component, especially since there are now related legal and regulatory requirements. Once the PDPA becomes effective, a data breach is not only painful because it might have exposed a weakness in the organization's security and damaged its reputation. Now, after the PDPA becomes effective, it will also have additional legal dimension, which can then result in liabilities, fines, and even criminal charges. Well, while we might have access to a lot of data, and we might have the technical means to process it in many different ways, the PDPA and other regulation is actually imposing certain constraints on how we manage this data. So what are actually some of these constraints? Well, we have to make sure that we have an appropriate legal basis to support our data processing activity. For example, would it be sufficient to rely on fulfillment of a contract, or do we need to obtain explicit consent from our customer? We will have to revisit and possibly adjust business processes to collect consent where needed and to store information about these consent so it is actually available and can be used where needed. So this will then allow, for example, marketing campaigns to be run in a way that respect the customer preferences. So, for example, those customers who have opted out to receive marketing communications, well, consequently then will no longer receive these advertising mailings. Another constraint or another requirement is that we also have to be transparent about the purpose for which we are collecting data and who we are sharing that data with. We need to find appropriate ways to disclose that information to the customers. We have to build our capability to manage data subject rights to ensure that we can process things such as a customer request to access their data or customer request to rectify and update their data records. Lastly, we also have to revisit existing incident management processes to ensure they allow us to spot whether an incident is a potential data breach that has to be reported to the authorities. And we also need to validate that these reportings can be performed within the required 72 hours time frame. On the flip side, again, and that is where it links back to opportunity, if we manage these constraints effectively and use data within these boundaries, it's also a very good opportunity to increase the trust that we have from our customers and other stakeholders. Okay, so now let's actually explore the relationship between data privacy and data governance and data management. So first, let's say that the data privacy's goal is the protection of personal data and making sure that respective obligations for the organization are met, and at the same time that we are respecting the rights of the customers and other data subjects. Data governance now seeks to actually maximize the value that an organization can get from its data. To achieve this, it provides planning, oversight, and control over all of the activities that are related to the management of data and the use of data as a resource or as an asset. And then data management itself, well, that's the performance of all these practices that actually deliver, control, protect, and enhance the value of data and information throughout the end-to-end life cycle of that data. Well, for effective privacy management, we need to have visibility of what personal data that we process, where we store it, and who we share it with. This then will allow us to apply appropriate security measures to protect the data. We also need clear accountability for the protection of personal data. If we now look at the disciplines here on the right-hand side, which are commonly considered to be part of data governance and data management, then we have highlighted for you here with these green boxes, those functions that we believe are primarily or very strongly related to data privacy. So let's look at some of these disciplines who emphasize their linkage to privacy. So for governance, well, that's for establishing clear ownership and governing bodies with respect to the data. For data architecture, well, that's in order to have this understanding of the existing system landscape. For metadata, well, this is to identify and understand what personal data exists in the organization and to have visibility of the data flows. Data operations, that's critical because this is what's actually managing the end-to-end information lifecycle. And yeah, last but not least is data security. This is to ensure that we manage access to the data in a way that it's not being disclosed to unauthorized persons and also not being modified in, say, inappropriate ways. So yes, those are some highlights of linkage between privacy and data management. So in summary, the connection to the PDPA is that data governance provides kind of the infrastructure and foundations that data privacy can build on. Without these foundational data governance elements in place, some of them would have to be created as part of a PDPA program. Good examples for this are actually maintaining a data inventory or mapping out the data flows. Where this has been done for PDPA purposes only, it will cover, well, consequently, only personal information. Whereas if this type of exercise would have been done as part of a broader data governance initiative, it would likely also cover critical data outside the personal data domain, such as, for example, risk or financial data. The same actually applies to data quality, which aims to improve the quality of data by means of profiling the data, running the data quality assessments, and then resolving any data quality issues. Because PDPA requires up-to-date and accurate personal data, and therefore having mechanisms in place that allow data subjects to rectify their data is an important element of effective privacy management. On the other hand, there are unique aspects of privacy management that are, say, outside the realm of data governance and data management, which are mostly the legal capabilities that are needed when judging, for example, the suitability of the legal basis for collection and processing, or when really drafting and developing relevant privacy statements and privacy notices. Okay, so now after clarifying this at the conceptual level, let's see how this looks like in practice. But before I pass to Andre, Kun Apicha will briefly recap on some of the key takeaways in Thai language.
ค่ะสำหรับในพาร์ทนี้นะคะก็จะขอ wrap up สั้นๆนะคะก็คือในส่วนนี้เนี่ยปัจจุบันเนี่ยข้อมูลมีความสำคัญมากขึ้นนะคะทั้งในแง่ของจำนวนที่มากขึ้นขนาดใหญ่ขึ้นแล้วก็เพิ่มขึ้นอย่างรวดเร็วทั้ง structured data แล้วก็ unstructured data นะคะทั้งข้อมูลภายในองค์กรเองหรือว่าข้อมูลข้างนอกองค์กรเองนะคะรวมถึงแนวโน้มความต้องการข้อมูลที่มีคุณภาพก็เพิ่มมากขึ้นรวมถึงการนำเทคโนโลยีมาใช้ในการวิเคราะห์ข้อมูลนะคะนอกจากนั้นเนี่ยพอข้อมูลเพิ่มมากขึ้นกฎหมายและข้อกำหนดต่างๆก็มีออกมานะคะเพื่อกำกับดูแลแล้วก็จัดการข้อมูลการมีข้อมูลเพิ่มมากขึ้นเนี่ยก็มีข้อดีนะคะแล้วก็เป็นโอกาสขององค์กรที่ทำให้องค์กรเนี่ยสามารถเข้าถึงความต้องการของลูกค้าได้ง่ายขึ้นสามารถตัดสินใจข้อมูลนะคะได้แม่นยำมากขึ้นนะคะประมวลผลได้แบบเรียลไทม์นะคะแต่ว่าอย่างไรก็ตามเนี่ยการที่ข้อมูลเพิ่มมากขึ้นก็จะมีสิ่งที่ต้องระวังหรือมีคอนเซิร์นนะคะอย่างเช่นข้อมูลใหม่ๆหรือข้อมูลชนิดใหม่ๆที่เรายังไม่เข้าใจมากนักนะคะอย่าง biometric หรือว่า geolocation นะคะหรือว่าคอนเซิร์นในเรื่องของการรั่วไหลของข้อมูล data loss data leak ต่างๆนะคะโดยเฉพาะข้อมูลส่วนบุคคลเพื่อที่จะป้องกันเหตุการณ์นี้นะคะองค์กรต่างๆเนี่ยก็จะต้องมีกระบวนการที่เหมาะสมในการจัดการเรื่องนี้นะคะรวมถึงองค์กรเองเนี่ยก็จะต้องพิจารณานะคะว่ากฎหมายต่างๆเนี่ยที่มีอยู่ในตอนนี้เนี่ยองค์กรเนี่ยคอมพลายตามแล้วหรือยังนะคะก็ในส่วนของ data privacy นะคะทั้งที่เป็นข้อมูลส่วนบุคคลแล้วก็ไม่ใช่ข้อมูลส่วนบุคคลนะคะที่เกี่ยวข้องกับตัว data governance นะคะ ตัว data governance เองเนี่ยก็คือเป็นพื้นฐานที่สำคัญของการทำ data privacy นะคะซึ่งจากตรงนี้เนี่ยเราก็จะเห็นว่าจะมีทั้งหมด5หัวข้อที่สำคัญนะคะก็คือ data strategy and governance นะคะก็จะเป็นเรื่องของการกำหนด role and responsibility policy procedure ต่างๆนะคะ data architecture นะคะก็จะเป็นเรื่องของ landscape system ของ data นะคะ meta data นะคะแล้วก็จะเป็นเรื่องของ data operation นะคะที่จะเป็นกระบวนการหรือ activity ของ data life cycle ตั้งแต่ต้นจนจบนะคะตั้งแต่ create use นะคะการใช้ข้อมูลการเก็บรักษารวมถึงไปจนจบที่การทำลายข้อมูลนะคะแล้วก็สุดท้ายเนี่ยก็จะเป็นในเรื่องของ data security นะคะค่ะถัดไปนะคะก็จะเป็นในเรื่องของ data governance นะคะ
Okay, so moving on to some examples and experience from European GDPR implementations. Well, it all starts in the data governance field. Now, I will just briefly introduce you to KPMG governance framework that we are using for that, and then I'm going to provide a few comments on what was happening actually here in the European Union. So the most important thing when talking about data governance is to look at its goals, what it is trying to achieve. And that is what you can see on the right side, all these green items. Data governance is here to achieve practical business goals, improve processes, increase cooperation, have better financial performance, foster innovation. And of course, what you can see there is also to become compliant. So this is one of the key goals, or to maximize the overall value of data and achieve these business benefits. Then in general, data governance is not about primarily technology, but primarily about culture and people. So the two key aspects are the data owners and data stewards that you can see in the middle. Data owners, they represent the actual management accountability for data in all its aspects. Data stewards are those who actually execute it, who are responsible for putting things together, supporting the business users, providing help to anyone who needs that. And these two key roles are the very foundation for data governance. And what data governance aims to is, of course, to provide data itself, and of course, meeting together with some data quality aspects of it, managing its life cycle, changes and incidents, and at the same time, providing the actual understanding of the data. Which is on the top, it's the metadata to actually describe what data means, where it is located, where are the data flows, and only these two things together, both the data and the metadata with addressed data quality and services, can achieve the final results of getting all of these business goals. At the same time, of course, the data governance itself should be aligned with general data architecture, general business strategy, and so on, which is the alignment that you can see on the very left side. Now, in Europe, quite a lot of companies actually started with building something like this, at least a basic data governance framework, because GDPR itself required nothing else but to put data under control and become compliant. So data governance was a very good starting point to have the data owners, have the stewards, understand in which business processes the data is needed, build the metadata. This is all that GDPR required. So a lot of companies started with building a data governance framework from scratch or somewhere already using, so fine-tuning it for the new purposes. At the same time, because they had build it, this data governance, they're also thinking about not just applying it for data privacy purposes, but to go a bit further. Not just focus on the personal/customer data, but maybe on their product data, because they had a lot of issues, for example, with their product catalog, putting their finance data under control, taking a look at the assets they have, and using the very same vehicle of data governance to actually not achieve just the compliance part, but also the effectiveness, cooperation, performance, and innovation that you can see on the slide. And also not just in the terms of these various domains, but with the customer/personal data itself. Yeah. So once I understand what kind of personal data I have, I can start thinking about the ways to use them for my better business practice, to have a 360 customer view, to have a better client prediction, and so on. So a lot of things can be applied, and a lot of companies actually leveraged this regulatory requirement to finally push forward initiatives that they were thinking about before, but didn't really have a full business case for that, and let's say abused the regulatory requirements to actually make a big step forward in their data governance practice. Now, what was happening then with the actual GDPR journey is on the following slides. And it really more or less follows a very typical data governance processes that are done once you have it in place. So the step one, of course, was to understand what is personal data. Is it just a name, surname? Is it the bank account? Is it my favorite music list or whatever? This needed to be put in order. And of course, again, not just that, other things could be described as well. And what companies utilize for that was some basic business glossary. So a metadata management solution, some of them used some tools available on market, some just started maybe with Microsoft Excel, but they were definitely trying to put it in one place to achieve that common understanding, which is one of the goals of data governance and definitely needed for GDPR purposes and PDPA as well. The next step was, of course, to actually find where that personal or other data is located. Again, here, definitely we recommend to use tooling for that. It probably doesn't make sense to have all the analysts across the enterprise to look for the data. It's much easier to actually at least borrow some metadata management tools. They can automatically harvest the existing technical metadata and show you where personal data is located, using also sometimes some artificial intelligence even to do some preliminary description and business tagging of this data. So speeding it up and definitely automizing and reducing manual effort. So that was maybe for, let's say, the structured data, but personal data is very often also part of unstructured data in various documents, photos, and others. So another step, step number 3, was actually to find the documents where this personal data is located. That was quite a heavy exercise. Again, a document management system can help here quite a lot if in place, and that can be, for example, some very basic ones like Microsoft SharePoint, to actually put together what types of documents contain personal data. So it's client agreements, client complaints, it's employee agreements, and many others. So just to understand in the first step what types of documents are there that contain these personal data. And then, of course, how in step 4 that relates to business processes. So which business processes use this personal data, both in the structured form or in the documents? What is happening in these business processes, or if there's any processing, if there's any transformation, if there's any sharing, how is this accessed? So mapping the business processes is an important part of the journey. And after that, it's great to actually take a look at the current state of how data privacy / GDPR is already addressed. So putting together all methodologies, policies, guidelines, internal materials that anyhow define how personal data is processed. Again, a lot of companies typically had a lot of these specific documents, starting from general policies down to a very detailed, for example, a guideline, how to enter personal data into SAP. This actually is a description of how to work with personal data, and the company needs to understand if that particular guideline is aligned with the regulation or not. When we move to the next slide, what follows is to put basically everything under control. On the first slide, we have made kind of an inventory check, what is where and how it looks. Now let's put that under control. So the first step is really to use some data management system, or in some specific cases also some reference data management, to have all that methodology around personal data stored in one place and related to each other, so that we understand if there's a general guideline and there's a detailed methodic of how to enter, for example, the data into SAP, it is connected and we understand that there are dependencies. We also need to put together all the consents and reasons for also the data processing. And it definitely helps greatly if it's all in one place. Another part of GDPR was to check for data quality. So is the personal data correct? Is it up to date? Is it complete? This needs to be put under control as well. So of course, it typically started with some overview of what exists and taking a look at what are the data quality requirements with respect to GDPR, which were translated into a data quality dictionary. All these rules were stored and unified related to the particular business terms. So I understand, for example, how do I check a client name or client ID? Then there was a larger space for various tooling support regarding the actual corrections of data. So some of the companies basically went for data quality tools, which were able to implement the data quality rules universally across their enterprise, both technically, I mean, like checks in a particular system, but also those soft tools like applying some principle of 4 eyes, applying some specific methodologies and others. A few companies also used the GDPR initiative to actually start some master data management programs. They were thinking for a longer time to actually have full view on their customers or employees or partners. So they went for master data management solution, which literally unified how data is treated across the enterprise for these particular domains. And all of these master data management solutions naturally have data quality as their content. Next step was to take a look at the actual data security aspects. So in Europe, most of the companies would typically have a lot of personal data already under quite a lot of control, but still some review of access control was needed. What was very often faced is that, for example, in some integrated data environment like data warehouse / business intelligence, people could take a look at almost any data, whereas in their primary system, they could see only a selection. So these inconsistencies had to be streamlined. Also, some additional monitoring was put in place, new ways of classification, and very specifically anonymization as a direct requirement of GDPR, especially, of course, on non-production and environments and for testing purposes. Then the last 2 steps were focusing on applying some automation on the actual running of the GDPR agenda. So once we know where all the data is, we have some control over it, but now the requirements from our customers or regulator come in. So a customer wants to provide a new consent, or a customer wants to understand what kind of data are we actually collecting about him, or what are we processing, or a regulator wants to see how we have actually treated, for example, data quality in our systems. So in order to make this more automated, a lot of companies started to implement something that they would call a Gdpr Engine, which would be providing all the necessary inputs. So if client A just calls and wants to ask what kind of data are we collecting about him, this Gdpr engine would use the name of that person as an input and would very quickly search and show you all the relevant information. So where the data could be stored, what kind of data are we collecting about that person, what are the processings done, what consents does that person have, and so on, so that the operator in the call center doesn't have to look for everything manually and would take him a lot of time. And the Gdpr engine, of course, needs to be integrated, which is the step 10, with a lot of other surrounding systems. Great. If we move to the next slide, this is just a showcase of how a solution for one of our particular clients in Europe looked like. Now, I don't want to go here into all details, of course. I just want to very quickly mention, emphasize that you can see a lot of things which are really related to data governance. First thing is on the left side. So metadata plays a very important role in GDPR and data privacy, and is the backbone of data governance. Understanding what kind of data you have, what it means, where it goes, in which systems it is processed, and how is a very crucial part of GDPR/PDPA. And at the same time, doesn't serve just for these purposes, but definitely almost every company complains about the fact that, yeah, we have some data, but we don't really know where it is, how it is processed, what it is used for. And this metadata solution, as part of your data governance practice, provides the means how to answer to these questions. And quite quickly, it's not that such a big effort. On the very left side, on the bottom, you can also see these aspects of data security, which are very important. So everything that you can see here must be properly treated from the perspective of identity management and access management, and having some monitoring and for some firewalls, dematerialized zones, and others, which help you to both internally but primarily externally become compliant with data privacy and security requirements. Then on the right side, on the bottom, you can see other enterprise-wide and reusable data management functions like master data management, reference data management, which manages code lists / code books. Some data quality means anonymization and archiving, again, which are all not serving just data privacy or personal data perspective, but of course are universally applied across the whole enterprise and serve all data governance key processes from the technical perspective. And then, of course, in the middle, you can have then almost anything that you can think about. This was the focus on Gdpr Engine, but if you, for example, want to focus on the customers, you could say, okay, we want to have everything around CRM perfectly done. If you want to take a look at your products or assets or whatever, still all those functions of metadata and data management would play a very important role, because it's all about data and governing it. On the last slide from myself, I have a quick overview of some key lessons learned with our clients here in Europe. What was one of the critical factors is to have quite a high level of support during the course of implementation of GDPR. A lot of people would be asking a lot of questions, would need to understand what is happening, what GDPR means, where the project of GDPR is currently standing in, what are they expected to deliver, and so on. Running a lot of workshops, having some FAQs, having some help, email or even a helpline, proved to be very efficient. We had a group of energy companies here in the Czech Republic, and they were kind of partially implementing each division, the GDPR solution separately. And one of them had a very strong level of support and very strong communication matrix. And the other, let's say, said, we are going to save on this. And the results were really very different. The first company achieved some basic level of compliance and overview of where it is standing at the moment in about 3 months. And the other was struggling still after a year. So definitely do not underestimate this communication part and be ready to provide it. Another important step, which is the second point, have the key personnel in place from the very beginning. We had the DPO, which is kind of, let's say, the key person responsible for GDPR within a company, some data owners and others, very early from the start, because again, we have experienced that if that DPO starts to jump on this running train during the whole project, then it definitely is a trouble. It is an issue to get all the information and so on is very hard and really prolongs this implementation project. So definitely start with the key roles from the very beginning. Then it's great to have some, let's say, centralized offerings in place. First one is some common methodology for GDPR alignment check, or GDPR, you can put PDPA there. So what are the people suggested to do? Have that check and say, okay, you take a look at the processes, see where you use personal data, check who is actually accessing it. So have this kind of a checklist and common way how to perform this initial assessment helps a lot. At the same time, which is the last point, it's great to provide some centralized tooling for that, so that everyone is able to write down these results of these assessments in one place or use one common tool, so that you don't have 20 different Excels and 20 different structures from various organization units, but have it all in a commonly shared and understood way. Fourth point here, mapping the business processes to see and identify gaps is probably the most efficient way how to see and identify these discrepancies. We have tried with a few clients some other approaches, like taking a look at the systems, taking a look at just the data itself, but it proved that the processes and the business view on it is the most efficient, because the people actually would understand what kind of data are they working at, if that really means the requirements, which would typically be named in the common methodology that I've been talking about. So the business focus will prove to be the most efficient way, surprisingly, but it is so. And then from the data perspective, several companies tried to, let's say, map all that personal data everywhere from the beginning. But it again proved to be kind of too much of a big bang. So the best approach way was to actually start from the core systems, typically some ERP system like SAP, and take a look, okay, what kind of personal data is in there, and where does it flow further? So maybe it's transferred here to our CRM system, here maybe to our BI, and gradually spreading over this net around to map the overall view on where data is located worked the best way. So that was it for me, and I would now kindly ask Picha to provide a quick summary in Thai.
Yes, okay. Thank you ค่ะ Andre. So คือจะ wrap up ในส่วนของ GDPR approach นะคะในยุโรปนะคะที่ทางคุณ Andre แชร์มาก็คือตัว data governance เองเนี่ย benefit ของมันก็คือทำให้องค์กรเนี่ยสามารถ add value ให้กับองค์กรได้รวมถึงเพิ่มประสิทธิภาพในการทำงานนะคะทั้งในแง่ของ finance แล้วก็ในแง่ของการprofit หรือว่า innovation ต่างๆนะคะสำหรับ GDPR approach นะคะpoint หลักสำคัญเลยเนี่ยก็คือจะเป็นการ assign role and responsibility ของ data owner นะคะ data stewardship รวมถึงจากนั้นเนี่ยก็จะเป็นการดูว่า data เนี่ยเก็บอยู่ที่ไหนนะคะก่อนที่เราจะไป mapping business process กับ data ต่างๆนะคะหลังจากนั้นก็คือจะเป็นการ implement ตัว policy procedure นะคะที่เกี่ยวข้องแล้วก็จะไปทำในส่วนของ data quality นะคะ master data ก็ meta data นะคะซึ่งตรงนี้เนี่ยที่คุณอองเดนเน้นว่าค่อนข้างที่จะสำคัญนะคะกับตัวdata governance นะคะแล้วก็ตัว data privacy นะคะหลังจากนั้นก็คือจะเป็นการ set up นะคะ data security นะคะเพื่อ monitoring data นะคะก็ต่อไปก็จะเป็นการ build solution นะคะสำหรับตัว GDPR agenda นะก่อนที่เราจะนำตัว agenda นี้เนี่ยไป integrate กับ business process ค่ะซึ่งจากตรงนี้เนี่ยก็คือ process หลักๆของ approach ของตัว GDPR เนี่ยก็มีขึ้นนะคะเพื่อควบคุมนะคะการใช้ข้อมูลแบบ full control นะคะแล้วก็องค์กรเองเนี่ยก็จะต้องมีกระบวนการพิจารณานะคะว่าจะต้องมีการใช้ automation หรือ manual ในการ integrate process ด้วยหรือเปล่านะคะก็ lesson learn นะคะจาก GDPR approach นะคะก็คืออันดับแรกเนี่ยก็คือจะต้องมีการ support นะคะจาก high level นะคะแล้วก็อันดับที่2เนี่ยก็คือจะต้องมีการ define role ที่สำคัญนะคะก่อนที่เราจะไปเทรนนิ่งพนักงานในองค์กรโดยที่ยังไม่รู้ว่าใครจะต้องทำอะไรนะคะซึ่งมันจะไม่ effective อย่างที่3เนี่ยก็จะเป็นการสื่อสารนะคะซึ่งเป็นเรื่องที่สำคัญมากๆที่จะต้องมีการจัดการการสื่อสารที่เหมาะสมนะคะแล้วก็เตรียมช่องทางในการสื่อสารที่เป็นระบบนะคะส่วนสุดท้ายก็คือจะต้องมีการcentralized support แล้วก็ tools นะคะซึ่งจะมีความสำคัญในการ implement ตัว data privacy นะคะ Gdpr หรือว่า PDPA นะคะเพื่อให้องค์กรเนี่ยสามารถปฏิบัติตามกฎระเบียบนะคะได้ค่ะค่ะ
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the summary. Now to continue, well, yeah, let's again look at a journey on how organizations might actually implement data governance. Because in an ideal world, we would embed data privacy into this broader enterprise data governance program. We can illustrate this in the graphic that you can see on the page that we're displaying for you right now. So actually it starts by defining the vision and the objectives of the data governance program and by putting in place the relevant governance structures, the roles and responsibilities. With respect to data, we would typically look to gain an understanding of the data domains which we have in our business to then prioritize them. Because it's not actually recommended to implement data governance in a big bang type of approach for all data across the enterprise at the same time. This prioritization helps to identify which domains to roll out data governance first to. With this roadmap and the data governance vision in place, we would design and build a data governance target operating model, or TOM, which defines the governance and management processes and clarifies the roles and responsibilities. This TOM would typically define the processes that are needed to govern and manage data. For example, how are we going to capture and document metadata? How are we going to measure the quality of data? And how are we going to resolve the data quality issues? For the implementation of the TOM, we would follow the roadmap for prioritized data domains and roll out the governance and processes domain by domain. You can see this as an example for metadata and data quality management. So if our top priority domain were, say, credit, we would look for critical data elements within the domain of credit data, capture information for the business glossary, establish the data quality requirements, develop the dashboards to monitor the data quality, and then resolve the data quality issues. And now, if we want to bring data privacy into the picture, in an ideal scenario, data privacy would leverage on the capabilities and the artifacts that have been produced as part of the data governance program. The privacy program would be able to use the metadata, which would provide us with the data inventory and data lineage to identify and locate where we process and store the personal data. And that information can then be used in order to accelerate the task of analyzing where in our existing processes and processing activities we currently do not yet satisfy PDPA requirements. So actually, this is a rather ideal scenario. In reality, we rarely see this deep level of integration because there is either not yet a strong data governance program where privacy could be plugged into, or the two initiatives might be running a little bit in isolation because of possibly different ownership or for other reasons. So in that case, privacy is more of a standalone effort without generating as many synergies from the data governance artifacts as it could be or would be ideal. So that means actually that data governance related artifacts might be kind of newly created in the privacy program. So let's actually look at one particular example of such an artifact that is very relevant to both data privacy and data governance. which is actually the data inventory. So let's move to the next page. Thank you. So yes, so that's again an example which I believe every PDPA program is producing, this data inventory. So we discussed earlier that metadata management is one of those data management disciplines which is highly relevant for data privacy. And a very kind of tangible outcome of metadata management is the documentation about the data that the organization holds and processes. So let's look at how such a data inventory that has originally been created for the purpose of PDPA compliance could be, say, enhanced to support the other data governance objectives. So for PDPA purposes, originally, the data inventory will help us to answer questions about what personal data do we hold, where do we store it, and what do we do with that data. To expand this inventory, we could now collect information about non-personal data as well. And then for probably improving the security measures, we could then also add information about information classification. So then, because enriched with this type of information, we can then also use this inventory as a key input into something like DLP, like data loss prevention solution implementation. Then in the last step, in the third step, we could move beyond data protection and add the aspect of data quality. So that means we could actually capture data quality requirements and related metrics, and then develop the dashboards for the subsequent monitoring of our data quality. So in this way, we could have built onto an artifact that was initially supporting only PDPA, and to actually then evolve this into a tool that can be used for data governance purposes. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as you've seen, based on what we have discussed in the session today, data governance is a quite broad and a complex topic. So if you are looking for help in any of these areas, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to discuss how we can assist you. So actually, before we close the session and move to the Q&A, we would like to give you the chance to access our Advanced Data Management Maturity Assessment Tool, or ADMMA for short. You can use this tool to get an understanding of your current maturity level with regards to data governance and data management. So if your organization is at an early stage of the data journey, you can use the insight that you get from doing this assessment as a starting point to create a roadmap for data transformation. If, on the other hand, if your organization is already fairly advanced on that journey, you can use this assessment to possibly validate the progress that you have already made and identify possible areas that might have to be recalibrated. So in other words, it's either a good starting point at the beginning of the journey or a good checkpoint to validate how much progress you have already made. So the ADMMA, it's a web-based tool with a comprehensive survey that covers actually all of the data management disciplines that we have discussed earlier. So how can you actually get access to this tool? So if you want to get access and you would like to use that tool, then please, as you are filling out the feedback survey, please mention in the comment that you would like to get access to the ADMMA tool, or easier, you can also just contact us directly after the event. So our email contact detail will be shared together with the presentation pack. And yeah, there is no cost associated with using this tool. And maybe, Andre, just before we get into the Q&A session, because I think we have been using this tool quite a bit in Europe, maybe can you share a little bit of the experience on what the key benefits are of actually using this this tool?
Yeah, definitely. Companies either for very quick initial assessment of where they are at the moment, to understand what is happening. This is typically done in the light version, where we just sit together with one or several client representatives and fill it in them together, kind of a quick self-assessment. Others go for a more, let's say, sophisticated approach. They like to send it out to various employees and professionals in their firm to also see different views on the levels of maturity, someone to have a broader analytical view on that. Almost every company then, of course, wants to improve the current maturity level. So they would typically use it to identify their ambition level. Okay, we want to move in these areas to set out some priorities and build a basic roadmap. And as part of building the roadmap, of course, they need to understand the gaps and what needs to be done. So they use it for initial kickstart of change management initiatives to improve some of these respective disciplines. In Europe, primarily, typically, mainly in the areas of metadata, data quality, and master data management.
Okay, thank you, Andre. So actually, next we will get into the Q&A session. But before doing so, I would like just to remind you all to please complete the feedback survey. And by the way, see, we can move to the next page. Yes, to please complete the survey. So you can see the QR code here. So if you scan this, you get to this very quick survey. And yes, please complete it. That will help us to further improve. Plus, if you would like to have access to the maturity assessment tool, I mentioned this in the comments there, and then we will provide you with the access. So while you are doing that, we will look into the questions that we already received, and we start discussing them. And again, you can use the Q&A box to submit any further questions to us, and you can do this in either Thai or English language. Okay, so I've actually had a quick look into questions that we have received so far. So I see there is a question around, yes, actually the data inventory. In which part of the data management disciplines does that relate to? So, well, yes, the data inventory, it's actually part of the metadata management discipline. Maybe Andre, to just elaborate a little more on this, can you maybe share what we actually see organizations do in that space of the metadata management?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of companies would here in Europe purchase some solutions for metadata management, which cover several modules to actually build this data inventory. We have been mentioning the business glossary as the starting point, and some data dictionary as, let's say, the technical metadata part, also available to assign these data governance roles like ownership, stewardship, specialist, data analyst, and so on. Running also additional features, for example, around the data quality rules, having even some relations to, for example, code lists and others. So this is how they would typically approach it. Other companies which selected primarily some Excel spreadsheets would again be following this best practice of at least splitting the business and technical metadata apart, and then aligning the data privacy issues with these two in mind. Because of course something is defined on the business layer, what kind of roles and who should be accessing the data, and then it's something that is actually happening in the system with the data with typically a bit different roles, so sometimes specific crude metrics and other parts.
Okay, thank you. And actually, just to pick up on this and on the broader theme of the tooling. So when we look at data governance and data management, yeah, which of these domains would benefit like mostly from the use of tools and technologies, or in other words, what type of tooling do you typically see deployed to support which aspects of the data management domains?
Well, that's like a question for like about 2 hours. But when we're just talking about the data governance itself, which is primarily the let's say mapping of the roles, assigning of the processes, and having some metadata in place. Yeah, there in Europe there are, let's say, two key areas addressed. One are players which do focus a lot on the business usage of the data and have very strong features in the business glossary and workflows around it, which are players like Colibra, Alation, or Alteryx, or Informatica with it, Axon. And then there are other players which are much better in the technical aspects of harvesting all the metadata, having super data lineage support for connection even to like parsing of the code, but are quite weak in the business aspects of having the proper business glossaries and so on. And these are players like, I would say, SAP, Oracle, or IBM, and also Informatica with its information data catalog is very, very strong in this. But still, we need to understand that it's just tools. So humans play a very critical part in it. So they need to understand how to use these tools to achieve the benefits. At the same time, it's good to also mention that most of the companies who selected Microsoft Excel as the starting and easy point are already now aware of the fact that they need to switch to some proper tooling in that, and it could be even custom made, but Excels just don't work in the long run.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of information and a short answer. So yes, good that that we didn't need a full hour to answer just only this question. But speaking of the time, I think now, yes, we have reached kind of the end of this 1 hour session. So at this point, I think I do hope that you have found this session informative and useful, that you could get some useful takeaways from it. So I definitely would like to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. And yes, well, I hope that you all will stay safe and take care, and that you have a great weekend ahead. Thank you very much from KPMG.